I think I went through a phase where I tried to be really Korean, apologizing and taking blame, and like no matter how hard you try, like people are always going to see you as like some kind of privileged foreigner. So don't try to fit in so hard to the point where you lose yourself. I think as a young woman in Korea, there are a lot of expectations for what is acceptable behavior. So for example, not to talk too loud or too much, or to like express your opinion too strongly. Things that are pretty much like, I think that to some extent, like to certain degrees, this kind of stuff exists everywhere in the world, in every culture, where, you know, girls are meant to be looked at and not, you know, like actually that they're meant to be seen but not actually like treated like as a real person. But in Korea, like, so I think that, again, like not to generalize every situation or every workplace or every setting or every Korean person, but I think I definitely struggle with that mask a little bit, because at first I try to overcompensate for my foreignness by being super Korean, and then I realized that's quite toxic and very like it was like eroding at my integrity as a person. So I just stopped trying to be like, you know, a nice Korean girl, basically, like really polite and like, you know, biting my tongue and like, you know, apologizing even though it's not my fault. Because I think that happens a lot too. Like, yeah, I basically stopped like gaslighting myself as a woman and, you know, and as a person, and just, you know, just said things the way they, you know, the way I believe, you know. So yeah, that's basically how I think that was one of my journeys with the mask. That was a bit difficult.
Is there anything that helped you ease into living in Seoul?
Yeah, so I think like, again, it was having an open mind and really actively trying to learn the language and making friends with locals, you know, like with like Korean friends, like not just like Korean diaspora friends, like other gyopos like me, you know, or other foreigners. Like I have some really good friends now and I'm really grateful for them. And they definitely have made me feel more like I have a place here. That's basically it. Time and understanding the culture, understanding the language. At first, having worked in education, I was very negative about the hyper-competitiveness of society here. And I didn't really understand it, because Canada is not as competitive, and people care more about like quality of life. And here in Korea, it seemed very materialistic to me. I think once I kind of understood the historical context, like this country rose from literally nothing, like from ashes, and then like industrialized like really rapidly in the mid-60s, right? So I mean, understanding that and having more conversations with like my family, like my grandmother, and understanding where she came from. Like she didn't even graduate, she graduated like elementary school. And so she lived in like a really different reality to me. And so understanding where she's coming from, I see now why people could be so competitive and maybe so like have such high standards for themselves and like want to be secure materially. And so, you know, I try to check my own like preconceived Western like notions and judgments about Korea. And in that sense, I think that's what made me at least more comfortable and accepting of this culture. I really did a lot, like my Tiffany's in Korea, in Seoul, was like going to Gyopo bookstore in Gwanghwamun, and I read a lot of translated literature from Korean to English, and things like Lee Mun-yeol's like Our Twisted Hero, the dwarf that threw the ball. The dwarf, yeah, the dwarf, there you go. It talks about like the industrialization of Korea and like kind of like the incredible turmoil that this country went through to get to where it is now. And so like now that I have some more context through literature, I can really understand better the psyche and the mindset of some of the people that I encounter, especially the older ones. You know, the older people, sometimes they kind of come off to me as quite rough and like a little bit brusque, and like I'm like, okay, you know, what's the deal? But now I understand. So yeah, and now I'm turning my like passion about books into a podcast for, you know, the Korea Herald where I work now. And so yeah, I really encourage, even if you don't listen to my books podcast, like to check out some translated Korean literature, because it really does help it helps anybody, I think, understand Korean culture, but especially if you're like a diaspora Korean and you have like not such big points of access, like not so many points of access to the culture, like literature could be a good place to start. Yeah.
I think literature does help for you to dig deeper and go under one more layer of below the surface level and see what's really going on here.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a really good help for other Gyopo as well. I think this is a great segue because one question that I had for you is, if you were to tell other Gyopos thinking about coming to Korea and living here, what piece of advice would you give?
I think that for me personally, one big lesson I learned is don't try to overcompensate for your foreignness. So don't try to fit in like so hard to the point where you lose yourself. Because I think I went through a phase where I tried to be really Korean and I try to speak like Korean all the time and to act very Korean, which means like apologizing and taking blame and just being super people pleasing, especially if you're a young person. And I think it's okay to accept that some people are never gonna like you or accept you, you know, like no matter how hard you try, like people are always gonna see you as like some kind of privileged foreigner or privileged Gyopo, even though that's not the case actually. For a lot of people, like, we all have very different, you know, diverse backgrounds and stories, and so yeah, just accept and like move on. And you know, there's plenty of really good people in Korea, like Korean people who will accept you for just who you are as a Gyopo. You don't have to be Korean, you don't have to fit in, because that's not who you are, right? There's no need to like fit a circle through a square hole. So yeah, that's my biggest advice. And learn Korean. if you're not fluent already, learn Korean.
Language does help.
Yeah, it really helps. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because Korea is getting more diverse day by day. And I think the idea of what Korea is supposed to look like or be like is changing and expanding. So hopefully, you know, that will help for other Gyopo in the future as well.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for talking about your experience being here as Gyopo. And I wonder if you have any questions about everything that we talked about today. If you do, please write a comment below and hopefully we'll get back to you. Also, you can check out Beth and her work.
Yeah, you could check me out on Instagram. I'm _@paperfetishist or Twitter @paperfetishist.
So there you go. Well, thank you for watching and we cannot wait to come back with more content. Bye!